pernicious anemia patients, that is the most oftenly it can occur by chance in patients, or it may like closely resemble the IgA deficiency patients, or those which have complete hypogamma globulinemia. So these patients, they resemble other patients with so if patients with pernicious anemia, they are found to be IgA deficient, then these typical set of pernicious anemia patients which have this IgA deficiency associated also, they have like certain mm, other atypical findings. That is, they would present at a relatively early age, that is before the age of 40, since most pernicious anemia patients are basically elderly. But those with IgA deficiency, they would present sort of earlier. And another atypical feature would be that they have a lower incidence of serum intrinsic factor and gastric parietal cell antibodies. And the third such a feature which will differentiate these from those with the normal pernicious anemia patients without hypogamma is that they have recurrent infections, which is a sign basically of this hypogamma so which is not present in normal pernicious anemia patients who have just other autoimmune disorders associated. So there is earlier presentation and lower incidence of intrinsic factor and parietal cell antibodies and recurrent infections. And then also regarding the gastric biopsy, the plasma cells, regarding the gastric biopsy, the plasma cells would also show this. They would be absent from the inflammatory infiltrate. So it would not be a mixed lymphocytes and plasma cell infiltrate, but it would be a sort of the a lymphoid infiltrate only. And just like in the typical pernicious anemia patients, the body and the fundus are involved and the antrum is paired. But in cases of IgA deficient individuals with pernicious anemia, the antrum is also involved. So this was these are some of the like atypical findings that these patients may have, those which have mm, uh, IgA deficiency along with pernicious anemia. And another fifth finding is that is can also differentiate typical IgA deficient patients with the pernicious anemia from other patients is that the gastrin level is normal in those with IgA deficiency. Just like we don't have a serum specific like intrinsic factor antibodies, and gastric parietal cells are also lower in amounts, so gastrin levels are also normal in these patients. Whereas in typical patients, not only do we have serum intrinsic factor and parietal cell antibodies, like intrinsic factor antibodies are found in 42 we had read earlier that it is found in about 40 to 60%, and these gastric parietal cell antibodies are found in about 80% of pernicious cell anemia patients. But in these IgA deficient patients, they are very like low incidence. They could be even absent. And also the gastrin levels are also normal, whereas in patients with the pernicious anemia, the gastrin level, the serum fasting gastrin level is also raised. And a sort of a lab value that they have given is like it could be more than 200 microgram per liter. So this gastrin level is raised in normal pernicious anemia patients. So whenever a diagnosis of pernicious anemia is made, not only we go with the history of vitiligo, mixed edema, or hypothyroidism, or hyperparathyroidism, and or this thyroid hyperthyroidism associated with Hashimoto's disease, but also we could go for IgA levels also. And then we need to go for the folate levels also, because we need to rule out whether there is a concurrent folate deficiency. And vitamin B12 levels need to be done, and there's specific that they, and we should be and even although even if they are normal, then they do not rule out a diagnosis of pernicious anemia, because the assays the factor that high intrinsic factor antibodies, um, they actually interfere with the assay. And then we need to do the methyl malonic acid and holotranscobalamin levels as an alternative to confirm the presence of severe deficiency. And then intrinsic factor antibodies are done, which are about present in 40 to 60% of cases, and gastric parietal cell antibodies are present in about 80% of patients. But of also because they are present in 10% normal, so they are not very specific for the disease. But so these are like one of some of the major criterias for labeling patients as pernicious anemia. That is, the B12 level is is low, the methylmalonic acid level is high, intrinsic factor antibodies are present, and we have to rule out folate deficiency, that is their normal serum folate and RBC folate levels. Then the minor criteria would be other clinical presentations, like there could be autoimmune disorders like hypothyroidism and vitiligo, or there could be a positive family history. Then also in CNS involvement, we need to have this neurological involvement of paresthesias, numbness, and ataxia. So like paresthesias and numbness and all those neurological deficits, they need to be there. These are the clinical findings. The minor criteria includes these clinical findings of CNS involvement, autoimmune disease, and family history. And then there are also the lab findings. And side by side, we also need to rule out the lab. We need to have the lab findings. That is, there would be macrocytosis and macrocytic anemia. And apart from all those reduced levels of B12, methylmalonic acid, raised levels of methylmalonic acid, and intrinsic factor antibody, other minor criteria also include this homocysteine level. That is, the total homocysteine will be increased in cases of uh, uh, pernicious anemia, and the fasting gastrin level is more than 200 microgram per liter. And then intrinsic factor antibodies are major diagnostic criteria, but the minor criteria would also include this gastric parietal cell antibodies, and also if the gastric pH is more than 6. So that would also suggest that there is a loss of gastric parietal cells and sort of a chronic atrophic gastritis. So along with that, we also need to go with the gastric biopsy, which would show the antral mucosa is preserved, but the body and fundus mucosa shows chronic atrophic gastritis with the achlorhydria and intestinal metaplasia, and lymphoid and plasmacytic infiltrate in the lamina propria. There's also this reference to pernicious anemia patients being mostly in Northern European and elderly, and those with the blue eyes and vitiligo. So these are like minor criteria for clinically diagnosing them. But the lab findings, although the classic lab findings are that there should be decreased B12 and increased methylmalonic acid and positive intrinsic factor antibodies in the absence of a folate deficiency. But other supporting lab findings could be that there could be elevated homocysteine level, and gastrin is also raised, and gastric parietal cell antibodies may also be present, and gastric pH is also more than 6, and then the gastric biopsy typical findings. So this
Excuse
is
me, Dr. Nadia.
a brief regarding the anemia workup. And regarding
Dr.
those patients with
Nadia,
IgA deficiency, they present earlier and they have decreased incidence of serum folate levels in the gastric intestinal malabsorption. There is intestinal malabsorption with a history of recurrent infections. And regarding the gastric biopsy, though the things that are atypical are that it involves the intrum, that the plasma cells are absent, and the gastrin levels are normal.
excuse me, Dr. Nadia. Excuse me.
Hello.
हेलो डॉक्टर नादिया हम जो ये वैल्यूज इसकी देसी की डिफरेंट है इससे हम उसको भी मेंशन कर देंगे कि ये मतलब हम लोगों ने क्राइटेरियाज हैं वी हैव अडॉप्टेड फ्रॉम देसी एंड लेवाइस विल मेंशन देयर ना बिकॉज देयर इज अ डिफरेंस बिटवीन द
Sorry,
hollow
could you repeat the
transcobalamine
question?
levels ये
Hello, could you repeat the
if they will ask about the criterias sorry
Hanji.
if you are going to mention about the
Bola.
criterias then this is the values are specific for the matlab these values are specific for the pernicious anemia like vitamin B12 is different like for vitamin B12 we label 200 nanogram less than 200 nanogram per liter yeah ye difference hai yeah that is a difference about between the book like we have to mention that we have taken these values from Desi and Levi's.
No, I don't think we need to. Because basically, what they have mentioned about pernicious anemia, this workup for pernicious anemia, they have not mentioned the value for total cobalamin, what serum
Yes.
cobalamin needs to be. They just mentioned that how we should go about referring to these intrinsic factor antibodies and gastric parietal cell antibodies, and then that even if there
And
is a
if we are
low
going to
normal
mention the
cobalamin
values,
test,
we
then
have to
how
mention we have to mention the actually I want to know that the book Desi and Levi's, it's also from UK na. If we are going to mention anything from the Desi, so it is more, it is the same thing, like
yes.
it's the same thing, and that is one of the reference book they you matlab we can give the reference of this book also when we are going to mention about the criterias.
I think these criteria, because I also copied this from Desi and Levi's, so I think we can just include them in the history, because this is not something that is
Mm.
mentioned in
The
this
guidelines.
like these guidelines. They do not give any mention to adding, because I think this would actually all this criteria is mostly like for like the medicine medical diagnosis. From our
Mm-hmm.
point of diagnosing this, we just need to be sure about the assays, that is when we should prescribe these assays, these intrinsic factor antibody assays and these gastric parietal cell antibody assays, when we should prescribe them. And that is when we should actually report them, because
Mm.
what we need to know is that only if the serum cobalamin level is like more than 295 picomole per liter, and if the patient, or if the patient has a recent history of cobalamin injection, then even
Mm.
then these intrinsic factor antibodies assays are they're not predictive of any sort of deficiency or of cobalamin due to pernicious anemia. So this is the only thing that I think these assays would signify. But the other criteria, all these criteria, although they would help us in identifying cases, like if there is a case of an elderly North European, and those with vitiligo and the typical features of this blue eye and gray hair and all that. So this could actually help us in diagnosing clinically the patient. But these are not basically they do not expect us to, like, label, I think, these criteria as such. This is something that we should
And
know
plus
from
the
our perspective of diagnosing these patients in MCQs perhaps, or from even a clinical point of view.
even I think in the most I would say
I um,
I think in the question they will also mention the reference, like the range of this, because it is so different in the same books from the UK. Like this is different in the Desi, and the recommendations, the values differ here. So I think when they will give the question, तो उसमें they will not ask about this. They will give the reference of the laboratory also. Might be.
So you are suggesting that they may sort of ask about, like, if this value comes, they may give us a value for serum cobalamin and then ask us to interpret it based on
Because it's
the
so
major and minor.
it's so variable. Like they cannot. Yeah, might be they can ask in the MCQs. They cannot ask these things in the MCQs. And if they give in the question, they should mention the reference ranges for the individuals.
So we'll have to take into account all of this in a combined sort of a manner. That is, if the value, that is what I'm trying to say, is that what actually I have also come across here is that those values which are very low, they would be suggestive of cobalamin deficiency, and so that would be like we just need to go about investigating them. But if a history is not suggestive for pernicious anemia, family history is not there, autoimmune history is not there, then those patients which fall in the like gray zone from like normal, if you have like 158 picomole is the normal, but if those values which are like plus 100 and around about like 100 to 250 picomole, or they have mentioned this 295 picomole per liter. So this in this range, which is basically a gray zone, these patients can still be included in the workup of cobalamin deficiency. taking into account that the values can be normal in in certain individuals and in certain technical issues. So they had mentioned even like patients with the high intrinsic factor antibodies that may give false positive may give false normal values for cobalamin. So
Hmm.
uh, those
Okay.
are patients that whose essay we need to actually reconsider. That is, even if a cobalamin essay is in this gray zone of between 100 to between 148 to like even they had mentioned this 295 picomole is which is greater than that even, and it appears to be normal. So then we should look into see whether there are some technical issues or whether they have had a recent cobalamin injection, so which could raise the value to like to normal, whereas actually the value could be very low. But recent like intervention has you know um, uh, actually helped has given us a false positive value for intrinsic factor antibodies, or a very high titer of intrinsic factor antibodies has led to a normal scopolamine level. So this is how we should
Hmm.
interpret it. So if intrinsic factor antibodies are like um, if we get intrinsic factor antibodies positive and the patient is not clinically pernicious anemia patient, we may say that they are positive only because there was a recent cobalamin injection given. And if the
Hmm.
intrinsic factor antibodies um, are positive, but the clinical history is not suggestive. So if the clinical history is suggestive and the intrinsic factor antibodies are positive, but then cobalamin level is normal, then we could also correlate that the intrinsic factor antibodies are such a high titer that they are interfering with the assay for cobalamin determination.
Hmm.
So it could be like
Thank you,
either
Akalia.
ways. Either some
Hmm.
factors about the disease would interfere with the assay for cobalamin estimation, and some factors about the disease would interfere with the assay for some factors about the intrinsic factor antibody determination. It would be like false positive if the patient had a recent cobalamin injection given. So
Hmm.
there could be like we have to like interpret this I think in this way,
Okay, then
because they have just
hmm.
mentioned all the antibodies that are done, and about how specific they are. Basically, it's just intrinsic factor antibody which is more specific, and also in the major criteria also they have mentioned that the intrinsic factor antibody is the major criteria and the gastric parietal cell antibodies are in the minor criteria. So patients who have intrinsic factor
Hmm.
antibody positive, they would be like more likely to have this pernicious anemia. Likewise, with
Hmm.
methylmalonic acid and level being increased in patients with the pernicious anemia. So, if even if homocysteine level is not raised, that's like a minor criteria. Then this
Hmm.
gastric parietal, then these gastrin levels, they are just important, I think, from the perspective of differentiating those pernicious anemia patients who have
With
also
the
an associated IgA
hypogamma
deficiency.
Hmm. Hmm. Thank you,
So I
Rahmania.
think that this is all that needs to be done. Although I remember this chart from Daisy that you're referring to also about the major and minor criteria, but I think we do not need to remember all of that. We just need to remember basically. I mean, I don't think we need to reproduce that chart. We just need to go through it
Hmm.
and just remember what is like most likely.
Ramnati, actually, I think we are just it's good to that we are going in such detail in theories because when actually we will go through the questions, we will find it easier, inshallah, at that time, inshallah.
Okay. I think.
We are left with how much time?
No, actually, I was just going through all those people that were entering the waiting room, and I was going through your comment also. I think Dr. Khaza probably just left then because I probably did not, close the waiting room. So most of the people were not able to connect at that time, perhaps. Because I have to actually go through all the adjustments again when we reconnect. I think I didn't open the waiting room, and perhaps I missed that um, message that you had given. I just looked up when you asked a question. I think he must have left then. Um, Although I really wanted to share this because he had actually asked that we go through the first part of it again, or perhaps I even share the recording. So regarding that, actually, I because of these interruptions, the recording was actually is also in like bits and pieces, and I was trying to formulate all of them together. So
Hmm.
I might share after some few days when I get time. I'm going to share them by putting the recordings together, because they are like haphazardly recorded in this computer, and some are recorded, and some for some I was not able to get the computer going. So
Yes, of course, it's
although
difficult.
he had mentioned that he wanted to participate, I feel so sorry that he could not participate in this session. Anyway, so regarding pernicious anemia, I think we have gone into much detail about the clinical features associated with who they are, what they are common in, like the age group, the sex, the females, then the blue eyes and premature graying and vitiligo, and like all those HLA types that are associated with pernicious anemia. And then how, like, this is how we actually pick up a clinical case of pernicious anemia. And then when we go about testing, we do all the testing for basically relevant to our hematological point of view, although there will be other antibodies like the thyroid antibodies and history of type 1 diabetes in these patients. But for pernicious anemia, we then have this intrinsic factor antibody, which is if you have those serological tests, and there's those gastric, but there are those histological tests. So there is serological and histological diagnosis. They both need to be taken into account. And then for histological diagnosis, there was this gastric biopsies, that the all those features of the gastric biopsy, and that is the body and the fundus are involved, and then the antrum is paired, and then there is this glandular element being lost, and they replaced by the mucosal intestinal metaplasia, and also this mixed inflammatory infiltrate of both lymphocytes and plasma cells. Then regarding its difference from IgA deficiency, and also regarding the intrinsic factor antibody and the gastric parietal cell antibodies. The intrinsic factor antibodies are IgG type of two types, 1 and 2, and with high specificity and positive predictive value of 95%. Whereas the gastric parietal cell antibodies are mostly have low specificity, and present, although they are present in 16 on percent, they are present in about 80% of the patients with pernicious anemia, but they're also present in about a major 10 to 15% of normal population as well. And these antibodies, they are directed against the gastric proton pump, so they cause achlorhydria, and therefore uh, they uh, they are and they can also be associated with found in patients with simple atrophic gastritis even. And I think this is all about pernicious anemia, and these serological and histological diagnosis that needs to be done side by side. But we'll be mostly focusing on the serological aspect. So all patients with anemia, neuropathy or glossitis, that is, these are the clinical suspicions that we have of pernicious anemia. That is, there is anemia plus neuropathy and glossitis, and suspected of having a pernicious anemia. And pernicious anemia is suspected mostly with the history of a family history and an autoimmune disease history. They are tested for anti-intrinsic factor antibodies, regardless of the cobalamin levels. So even if the cobalamin levels are normal, if the history is very suggestive, we will still go for anti-intrinsic factor antibodies, because as you mentioned earlier, the anti-intrinsic factor antibodies, if they are very high, they could interfere with the assay for cobalamin testing. And in cobalamin testing, if the cobalamin level is in the borderline normal, in the low normal range, that is uh, it is more than or it is perhaps in the normal range, more than 300 nanogram per liter. So it may be like in the normal range, it may be in the normal range with that normal range could be due to having had recent cobalamin treatment. So with recent cobalamin treatment, even if the anti-intrinsic factor antibody comes out to be positive, so this would actually this high cobalamin level would interfere with the anti-intrinsic factor antibody assay, because the high cobalamin level as a result of cobalamin treatment would actually interfere with these and would actually give a false and positive found to have low serum cobalamin levels in the absence of anemia and who do not have food malabsorption or other causes of deficiency should be tested for intrinsic factor antibody to clarify whether they have an early latent presentation of pernicious anemia. So even though even those with normal cobalamin levels should be tested, and even those with low cobalamin levels in the absence of anemia who do not have full should be tested for intrinsic factor antibody, because they may be this may be an early latent presentation. So an anti-gastric parietal cell antibody testing for diagnosing is not recommended. So anti-gastric parietal cell antibodies are like a minor criteria, and since they are present in most of the about 10 to 16% of the normal population as well, so they are not in the major diagnostic criteria for pernicious anemia, and they are not, their testing is not recommended for diagnosing pernicious anemia. Then the treatment of cobalamin deficiency is that current clinical practice within the UK is to treat cobalamin deficiency with hydroxycobalamin in the intramuscular form. And the standard initial therapy, this is according to the BNF formally, the standard initial therapy of without neurological involvement is without neurological involvement is 1,000 microgram intramuscularly 3 times a week. So it should be 1,000 microgram. The dose is 1,000 microgram intramuscularly 3 times a week for 2 weeks. So basically, we are giving it for 2 weeks, and they will be actually just 6 injections. So like 6 injections 3 times a week for 2 weeks. We need to divide them or in alternate days intramuscularly or in alternate buttocks perhaps in. So on alternate days in alternate buttocks and 3 times a week for 2 weeks, 6 total injections. And the BNF advises that the patients presenting with the neurological symptoms should receive 1,000 microgram intramuscularly on alternate days until there is no further improvement. So for standard therapy, it's just for 2 weeks. But those who have presented with neurological symptoms, they actually have a more severe form of a deficiency. So they would need to continue the injections on alternate days until there is no further improvement. However, the guidelines working group they recommend pragmatic approach in patients with neurological symptoms by reviewing the treatment after about 3 weeks of the need for continuation of alternative day therapy after 3 weeks of treatment. So basically, we can consider we can consider this treatment after 3 weeks on follow up. So after 1 month on these injections, perhaps we can taper down the dose. Patients presenting with severe anemia may develop a transient hypokalemia following treatment, the clinical significance of which is unknown. So, and potassium replacement therapy must be considered. So, basically, this is also mostly in, they have also mentioned here, this may be because of the reticulocyte response, which is evident by 7 to 10 days, provided the patient has adequate levels of iron and folate. So, if they are having adequate levels of iron and folate side by side with cobalamin, then the retic response is very sudden and it evident by 7 to 10 days. And basically patients who are given this cobalamin, who are cobalamin deficient, and they are given cobalamin, they symptomatically they respond within about 24 hours, because most of them who have these neurological complaints, they s- they will start saying that they feel better, just after for 24 to in for 20 or to 48 hours. And but like in 24 to 48 hours, perhaps even they may it's not that the anemia gets better, although the reticular side response would be evident by 7 to 10 days. But probably because of all this high rate of proliferation, because there was a block in this proliferation, the covalent deficiency had caused a block in this proliferation. So when this proliferation occurs, probably because of that, there's a transient hypokalemia. So we need to be on the lookout for that. And because of this, most of these injections also they are advised in to be given in probably in the certain primary care settings, or so that they have access to monitoring. That is, there should be a doctor in who can monitor if there's a certain hypokalemia that may develop. So, or otherwise they are just advised potassium replacement along with this. If a hematological response is not achieved, the initial diagnosis should be reviewed. A suboptimal response may indicate previously masked iron deficiency or presence of another coexisting cause of anemia. The maintenance treatment for, I think, if we run out of time, we'll just I'll just complete this treatment part here, and then we can go on with the algorithms, Chala, next tomorrow, because I think the 10-minute reminder has come up again. So patients presenting with severe anemia may develop a transient hyperkalemia. Then the maintenance treatment for patients presenting without neurological deficit is with hydroxycobalamin. Oh, okay. So you've done this. That the initial treatment is 1,000 3 times a week for 2 weeks, and then the maintenance is 1,000 microgram intramuscularly every 3 months. So after 2 weeks, we have given 6 injections. We will then go on to every 3 months one injection. And those with initial neurological deficit should receive hydroxycobalamin 1,000 microgram intramuscularly every 2 months. That would also be this is also there for those neurological deficit people, that sometimes you just continue giving them on alternate days or for like 1 month, and then after this they are given this about every 2 monthly. So the maintenance part is the treatment part is also different for those that is to give it for just like about 2 weeks, 6 injections, or for 3 weeks in case of those with neurological impairment, then 2 months for those with neurological impairment, and 3 months for those uh, with the without neurological impairment. And no further testing for cobalamin level is required. And although there is little evidence that, and then follow-up testing is not required, because mostly the stores are filled up, and then hydroxycobalamin is also generally well tolerated. Those side effects, including itching, exanthemas, and chills and hot flushes, may be there, and even anaphylaxis. This may be due to hypersensitivity to cobalt or any other component of the medication. And SNE-form eruptions have been noted, and skin patch testing may be required to choose an appropriate product. And if absolutely necessary, treatment may be considered using hydrocortisone cover in a hospital setting where severe hypersensitivity can be managed. So this was one of the part of saying that it is why it must be basically in a hospital setting, whether a primary care or secondary care, but or tertiary, but there should be a hospital setting where severe hypersensitivity can be managed, because most patients can suffer hypersensitivity with this also. And high dose cyanocobalamin. So this was hydroxycobalamin, and then high dose oral cyanocobalamin, that is 1,000 to 200 microgram, is licensed for use in several countries outside UK. And passive and intrinsic factor independent absorption of a small fraction of such large doses should suffice to meet daily requirement. And this cyanocobalamin is the one that we had mentioned earlier, that is used in for nitrous oxide inhalation of toxicity. And the use of some suggest that the use of oral cobalamin initiation is in severely deficient who have poor absorption, especially due to pernicious anemia. So they advise that intramuscular and route should be used. And oral high dose cobalamin would be reasonable alternative as maintenance only in patients who are unable to tolerate the intramuscular injections. So low dose cyanocobalamin is licensed within the UK and may improve serum cobalamin and biochemical markers in borderline cases. And care must be taken if low dose supplements are prescribed, as such an approach risks the suboptimal treatment of latent and emerging pernicious anemia, with possible inadequate treatment of a neurological feature. So we need to take first we need to actually to have a thorough workup done, so that low dose supplements are not prescribed to just push those patients who have actually an emerging or a latent pernicious anemia patients into patients who with normal systemic serum cobalamin levels, and so we do not do the workup probably. So the treatment of established cobalamin deficiency should follow the schedules. That is, those with neurological symptoms should be monitored like in a 2 weekly for 2 weeks, 6 injections, or alternate days 3 weeks injection, and maintenance is with every 3 monthly for without a neurological involvement, and every 2 monthly for with neurological involvement. And initial treatment with oral cobalamin may not be appropriate in pernicious anemia. So in pernicious anemia, oral cobalamin is not recommended, because of course there is this intrinsic factor in the gastric parietal cell antibodies, all of which will inhibit the oral absorption. So intramuscular route is considered, and in pernicious anemia, initial treatment is not with the oral form, but in the maintenance or the correction of suboptimal levels, because in pernicious anemia they would need to be on lifelong therapy. So initial treatment is with the IM therapy, and then maintenance could be with this oral dosing as well, or suboptimal levels in asymptomatic patients, maybe or we may even consider it in asymptomatic patients who do not have the full form of the disease. So in pernicious anemia, either if the patient is in the latent form, then we give them oral, or if they are in the maintenance state, then we give them oral. Whereas otherwise, in the initial treatment, only intramuscular injections are given, and then they need to be continued lifelong. So that is why they are allowed to like take this, do not have lifelong intramuscular injections. Just they might, if they have this initial treatment with IM, they may continue with the oral for in the maintenance phase. So I think this brings us to the end of this pernicious anemia treatment. Now these are all these algorithms that we'll probably just go through before we go to the folate treatment part. The folate part is actually quite brief compared to this cobalamin treatment, since they not only have these different algorithms for patients with pernicious anemia, and then also patients with suboptimal and subclinical deficiency, and also patients with who are taking or in females, and then or those patients who are taking oral cobalamin or HRT. So if we have time, if after joining in, we might go into this part about the recommendations of this. So if I think we'll just need one more session. So if you're willing to continue, I we can finish this part as well right now. I think we'll just since we have some other people joining in, I think we'll continue again after this brief interruption that we have because of 40-minute time limit. So we just have about 1 minute left. So I'll just take a small break of 2 minutes, and then we'll rejoin and try to finish these algorithms for the clinical approach to investigation